Hello, I'm clearly not Chris Sams and doing the intro, but welcome to episode 5 of our Narvik series. Chris has gone away because we've got nothing naval going on, and I'm kind of taking a back seat because we've got nothing naval going, because clearly Chris always gives me the naval stuff to do, and then I have to learn it, and then, I don't know if I say it right or not, but I do give it a go. Anyway, I am going to bring Chris back because he is the man of the hour who has created this whole series because he knows more about Narvik than I do. Chris.
Yeah, well, debatable, but but yes, no, I couldn't go anywhere, especially not on Easter weekend. But I am going to be talking about the Germans, which is the other thing I end up talking a lot about, and the sort of a recap of their advance from Oslo towards Lillehammer. So, as we said in last episode, the Germans have kind of divided themselves up into similar to Kampfgruppe size units, and Kampfgruppe Fischer has reached Kongsvinger, which was at the start of the Osterdal Valley, which, as I said last episode, they're going to use as a highway along the east side of Norway. On the 18th, Landil was at Hammer, and by the 20th, both groups have reached Elverum, which is sort of a major railhead on the southern railway, and that also connects to Sweden, which is going to help with getting the ore across when the weather's bad in the winter months. On the western side of the front, Aslok has taken Fluberg on the 19th, and Zantier has taken Gjovik. The Norwegians are slowly being forced to withdraw, partially from the German momentum, but mainly from blistering air attacks. They just haven't got anything to be able to stand up against the Luftwaffe at this stage, and the RAF still haven't arrived yet. However, the British have started to arrive, haven't they, Zane?
They have indeed. We have what is known as Sickle Force. Also, technically, it's the 148th Brigade. Now, as you've mentioned, just recently, the Norwegians are being forced to fall back, and they're, of course, in danger of collapsing. And so this is, I guess you could say, in the vein of Alina in last episode, this is the time that the British decide that they're going to send a unit to assist. And so the 148th Brigade is going to be dispatched to the south. Now, originally, they're supposed to embark to go to Namsos, which is north of Trondheim, but they are disembarked and put on smaller vessels destined for the southern port. The brigade was under the command of Brigadier Morgan, and when they would land, they would do so with some severe shortages, including a lack of vehicles, the all-important maps for the Namsos region, rather than their current destination. And they also had no mortar ammunition, no communications gear, and no anti-tank weaponry to speak of, as well as missing about half of a battalion who were not able to fit on the smaller ships. So unlike their British enemy, who was able to figure out a clown car, unfortunately, the British just couldn't fit enough people into their smaller ships. Now, the force, interestingly, is mostly made up of territorials rather than full regulars, and they're also inexperienced. But of course, they're going to press on to the south to assist the Norwegian front line where they can. Now, it all goes without saying that they did not bring any air support either, as was already mentioned by Chris, of the RAF. And what's interesting here is this conversation about, what this force looks like, how they don't necessarily have the gear and the equipment that they need, because something that Chris and I have talked about offline is that this is really a time where, at least for where this comes into my research, is this is really a moment where they start to learn and get experience with independent brigades that would eventually become commando units. And so this is really that beginning stage of how can we use other forces, not just regulars, but more importantly, what can we learn from these skirmishes with these smaller ships and not having enough ammunition and the whatnot. Would you think it would be a fair assessment to say there, Chris?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was sort of going through the research notes for later episodes, and independent companies are going to come up quite a lot. So I think it's probably something we're going to have to explore in detail, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And like I said, for me, with my research with the number 10 Inter-Allied Commando Unit, it brings up a lot of interesting parallels. The lessons that were learned, right? That I'm seeing the results of these lessons. And here we are talking about the actual lessons that they're going to learn from. So now we have a testimony from Brigadier Adrian Carton, who was the brigade commander.
The Norwegian coastline was lovely to look at, with the majesty of its rough mountains covered in snow. But from a fighting angle, the view had no attraction for me, as obviously, in this type of country, one would need very specialised troops. We reached Namsos in the evening and started to disembark troops at once. It was soon evident that the officers had little experience in handling men. In Norway, at that time of year, there were only about 3 hours of darkness, and landing with troops while the whole country was under snow and a vigilant and attentive enemy was no easy matter. The troops were only too anxious to do what they were told and be quick about it, and it says much for them that not only did they succeed in landing, but they completely obliterated all traces of their landing. The Germans who flew over the next morning suspected nothing.
So yeah, he's kind of realistic about what's going on, but also painfully optimistic. I mean, he's got the Victoria Cross. He's got horrendous war wounds from previous engagements in the First World War, and he's quite, for a British soldier, he's really, really buoyant about what's going on and that they will do quite well. But at the same time, the Germans are now able to field the reformed 196th Infantry Division, and this is also pushing up towards Trondheim. And the Norwegians have been forced to form their own two Kampfgruppe style formations under Colonels Dahl in the east and Hjorthi in the west. Ruger requests help from the Allies, and the 146th are pulled south to Lillehammer to assist in the Norwegians. And this is something we're going to be talking about in the next episode, because you have two very crucial battles which will decide the Norwegian campaign in the south. But meanwhile, we also have the 146th Brigade, or Hammer Force. On the 14th of April, they secure 350 Royal Marines go ashore at Namsos to secure the jetties and the port, so that the rest of the force can land, because if you need something done right, you send the Navy in first, then maybe the Army. 146th Brigade are landed at Namsos instead, as they had originally been earmarked for Narvik, whereas Sickle Force has drifted south to Anderlesenes. 146 has also drifted south from Narvik to Namsos to sort of take up their space. They land 2,169 men in 3 battalions from the transports Schrobe and the P&O Empress of Australia. As they land, they're being landed during an air raid on the destroyers. When Empress of Australia goes back to the UK, it still had 170 tons of stores on board because they didn't have time to unload it properly. So this is going to be fairly vital. They were all ashore by the evening of the 17th, and forces from the French 5th Demi Brigade began landing on the night of the 19th of April. On top of the British being short of equipment, including each man only carrying enough ammunition for 1 day's fighting, they also have no artillery, and 1 battalion is missing their 3-inch mortars, which were still aboard ship. They're also operating in 2 feet of snow. So, when we talk about going up the beaches, everyone pictures D-Day or Dieppe, sort of sandy beaches. But in Norway, it's 2 foot of snow whilst under fire from the Germans. The force joins up with elements of the Norwegian 5th Division, and they begin to push the German forces in the Trondheim area back. And they manage to take Stiemskor with the original plan. Well, the original plan was to catch the Germans in a pincer with the 148th Brigade. But as they've been pulled south, they're going to have to wait. So they're just sort of trying to contain the Germans in Trondheim as best they can. On the 20th of April, the ever-present Luftwaffe attacked the harbour to try and stop further landings. The British still don't have any anti-aircraft cover. They certainly don't have any fighter cover. And the Germans completely destroy the wooden town. It causes absolute chaos. And the German Navy also send one of the remaining destroyers into the harbour to cause some chaos. And we have the testimony of John Clegg, who saw the remains of the town and the Stuka attack.
As we came up the fjord to Namsos, all I could see was what looked like a series of sticks sticking up in the air. This would turn out to be the chimney breasts that was left of the town. The town, having been firebombed and being Norway, had been built of wood. The only thing that remained had been the chimney breasts. In the centre of all this mess was a large safe, which obviously had been the local bank. On the way up, we had our first experience of a totally new weapon, the Stuka dive bomber. The first dive bomber I saw came over at about 12,500 feet, and it came straight down. Most people cheered, thinking it was going to crash. Of course, it pulled out and released its bomb with a screaming device on it, which emphasised the noise as it came down. It went straight down the funnel of a destroyer. We'd never seen anything like it.
On top of all this, the Germans are not happy to wait, and on the 21st of April, they begin their own advance. At 6 a.m., the Norwegian forces, who were engaging a force of 600 Germans who were advancing on motorbikes and foot. Norwegian machine gun section and a force of Royal Engineers fall back to join up with the British infantry at Stilskjad, but at the same time, a force of Germans had also landed, mostly made up of Austrians, who are pretty used to mountainous snow weather, I think it'd be fair to say, and they've landed on the jetties of Kieksnjevag and move up to cut the main road south to Vist. British hold onto the Strømmen Bridge, which is the only land exit from the Inderøy Peninsula, whilst the 4th Lincolnshires now hold a front at Vist facing west, and the King's Own Yorkshire Light Infantry hold the main road south of Vist. At 9:30 a.m. on the 22nd, the Austrians attack using machine guns and trench mortars, which they're now carrying in the sidecars of their motorbikes to sort of provide a sort of almost mobile, really light artillery. They also bring up some light field guns to attack the Allied positions. They're also using farm tracks to scout the British positions so that they can try and outflank them on the main roads, but because the weather conditions, as we said, are pretty atrocious with that much snow, they're not able to make that much headway, and so they kind of have to resort to going back along the main roads. Then the Luftwaffe turn up and they bomb Steyenia, where Brigadier Phillips has his field HQ. By the afternoon, yet again, all the wooden buildings are ablaze and the water supply is damaged. The main road bridge is destroyed and the railway unusable. One company of the Lincolns had suffered 20% casualties and withdrew, as did 2 companies of the KOYLI. And the Austrians take control of the main road. Brigadier Phillips requests permission from Dwight for the brigade to fall back to Namsos, which was allowed, and by the end of the 22nd of April, they're withdrawing. Norwegian positions had not been attacked, and the 13th Chasseurs Alpine advanced to relieve the Hallamshire battalion. But by the 27th of April, the Germans were also down to 3 battalions and couldn't push the advantage to push on to Trondheim. But they've done enough to push the British back to stop them from causing them any more trouble themselves. So it's all, to quote Match of the Day, there's still a lot to play for in this area. So this episode has, again, been a bit of a continuation of the fighting and sort of the forward momentum. The Germans are not brushing everyone aside, but they are pushing quite successfully, and the British are finding they haven't got the right kit. But next episode, we're going to find out if they're able to halt the German advance, a very crucial point, or whether the whole thing's going to collapse. So do come back for that. Also, go over to Patreon and check out our bonus features. Somehow we'll be getting Doctor Who into this as requested. But also any likes, comments, star ratings on your preferred podcaster platform of choice would be much appreciated. And thanks as always for joining us.